Cleopatra's last night, the queen who chose her own ending the night the world ended for Cleopatra. There were no screams and no thunder of armies. Only the sound of silk brushing marble and the faint whisper of the Nile outside her palace walls. History remembers her as a temptress, a queen who loved too boldly and lost too much. But this isn't a story about seduction. It's a story about power, pride, and the moment a woman looked at her own death and said, "I will decide how this story ends." It was 30 BC Alexandria, once the brightest jewel of the world, now stood under Roman shadow. The streets that once sang with poetry and philosophy now echoed with soldiers' boots. The banners of Egypt had fallen. The empire she ruled, the bloodline of pharaohs, was collapsing. Cleopatra stood on her balcony, watching smoke rise from the harbor. Her lover, Mark Antony, the man she believed would save Egypt, was bleeding out on the marble floor below. Hours earlier, Antony had received false news that Cleopatra was dead, and when that message reached him, he took his own sword and fell upon it. By the time she found him, he was dying. He asked to be brought to her, and as her servants carried his broken body through the corridors, she wept, not as a queen, but as a woman. "Do not cry for me," he whispered. "I go where you will follow." She kissed his forehead, her tears falling on his armor. And in that moment, she understood something terrible. Rome would not rest until she was gone. Outside her palace, Octavian's forces waited, the armies of Rome. Julius Caesar's adopted son. The boy who had once eaten at her table. Now her conqueror. He sent a messenger with an offer of mercy wrapped in pride. "Yield, Cleopatra. Rome will spare your life if you come in chains." She smiled faintly when she heard the words. "Chains?" she whispered. "No, Egypt does not crawl." For days, she withdrew into her private chambers. The walls were lined with gold, the air heavy with incense and memory. She wore no crown, no jewels, only a linen gown and silence. Servants whispered outside her doors, afraid of what was coming. But inside, Cleopatra was calm. She wrote her final letters to her children, to her few loyal friends. Then she summoned her most trusted handmaiden, Iris. "Bring me the basket," Cleopatra said. The one that had arrived that morning, wrapped in palm leaves, carried by a farmer as a gift. Inside it, hidden beneath figs, was a small woven jar. No one but Cleopatra knew what it contained. That night, she bathed slowly in milk and oils, combed her hair until it shone, and painted her eyes with kohl one final time. When she looked into the mirror, she did not see a woman defeated. She saw Egypt proud, eternal. As the moonlight filled her chamber, she whispered to Iris and Charmian, "When I am gone, tell them Rome did not take me. I left by my own will." Her voice trembled only once when she added, "Bury me with Antony. Let the world remember us as one." Outside, the guards waited. They thought she was praying. In truth, she was saying goodbye to her kingdom, her children, her life. Through the palace window, the Nile shimmered under the moon, ancient, endless, untouched by empire. Cleopatra closed her eyes and said, "Even the river remembers who I am." As the final hour approached, she called for the basket. The serpent stirred within, coiling like a shadow beneath the figs. Cleopatra smiled. She had made her choice. The Romans would never parade her through their streets. Egypt's queen would not die a prisoner. She would die a goddess. But before she reached for the basket, she paused. Because at that moment, she heard a child's laughter echo faintly down the corridor. Her son, Caesarion, the last heir of Julius Caesar, was asleep in the next room, unaware of the world collapsing around him. She turned toward the sound. For the first time, the queen hesitated. The sound of her son's laughter faded, like the echo of a life she would never see again. Cleopatra stood there for a long time, her hand trembling against the marble wall, the serpent's basket beside her, silent and waiting. For years, she had worn crowns, ruled kingdoms, defied empires. But this hesitation, this fragile moment, was the most human she had ever felt. Her son Caesarion, child of Julius Caesar, was her last hope. The Romans had promised to spare him. But Cleopatra knew Rome's promises turned to dust. She whispered, "He must live." Then she called her most loyal guard and pressed a sealed letter into his hand. "Take him to the Red Sea," she said. "To the ships still loyal to me. Tell them the queen commands her son to sail far from Rome." The guard bowed, his eyes wet, and left in silence. When his footsteps disappeared, Cleopatra turned back to the basket. The moonlight touched her face, calm, radiant, unbroken. She whispered softly, "I have lived as a goddess. I will not die as a trophy." Iris and Charmian stood nearby, their eyes filled with tears. Cleopatra smiled at them gently. "It is not death that frightens me," she said. "It is humiliation. Rome would chain me and call it mercy. But a queen of Egypt bows to no one, not even to time." She opened the basket. The serpent uncoiled, smooth, glistening, alive. It lifted its head and met her gaze. For a moment all was still. Even the torches seemed to hold their breath. Cleopatra extended her hand. The serpent struck. Single bite, swift, silent, final. Her body shuddered once, then softened, as though sleep had finally claimed her. Iris gasped, but Cleopatra's eyes opened once more. She smiled faintly and whispered, "Do not weep. I am returning to the gods." Her handmaidens, unable to live without her, followed her path one by one. When Roman soldiers entered moments later, they found her lying on a golden couch, draped in white, her crown beside her, her face serene. Octavian, Rome's new master, stood at the doorway. He had come to take her alive, to show the world that even queens could be broken. But when he saw her, he stopped. For one heartbeat, even Rome's pride fell silent. "She has beaten me," he murmured. Even in death, she chose her own victory. He ordered that she be buried beside Antony. Not from mercy, but from respect he could not deny. The people of Egypt wept, not for their ruler, but for the woman who refused to bow. The palace grew silent, as the great library's walls whispered her name. And the Nile flowed on, as if carrying her spirit through eternity. Days later, Octavian learned that Caesarion had been captured. The boy, barely 17, was executed quietly, ending 3,000 years of divine rule. With his death, an empire ended, but Cleopatra's name lived on, not as Rome's captive, not as a lover, but as a woman who chose freedom over fear. Empires fade, kings fall. But her name, Cleopatra, endures, because her death was not surrender. It was a message. That power without dignity is nothing. That love, even in tragedy, can be eternal, and that no empire can cage a soul that chooses its own ending. When the dawn rose over the Nile, the gods had taken back their queen. Her throne turned to dust, but her legend became immortal. Cleopatra's story did not end that night, simply transformed from history to legend, and in that legend she still reigns.